Episode 6. They all arrive at the Red Keep. Jon ends up with Drogon there. Davos and Podrick tell Jon all about the ice dragon. Jon says, the soldiers should put the dragon glass on the scorpions. Arrows will just bounce off. Jon sees the chaos in the city and the approaching army of the dead. He sees the ice dragon flying in the sky and says, we cannot stop an army that gets bigger with our losses. We have to destroy him. Just him. Jon points his sword at the ice dragons in the sky. Davos says, not every one of us has a dragon glass weapon. Jaime agrees, but says, we cannot change much now except handing out the rest of the dragon glass. Jon looks at his blade and asks Jaime, how many swords from Valyrian steel are melted in the Iron Throne? Jaime reacts in surprise and says you want to. I mean, how? Jaime looks at Drogon and understands. He says, unfortunately not 1,000 like in Aegon's stories. The stories of your ancestor. Maybe 300 swords or less. Jon looks around and says, fewer. That must be enough. Jon asks Jaime where exactly the throne room is. Jaime answers him and Jon gets on Drogon. He lands with Drogon in the throne room. By doing so Drogon destroys the ceiling. Snow and ashes fill the throne room. Jon sees several bodies in the hall, including Cersei's. He almost touches the throne, but then lets go before he touches it. Jon says, this uncomfortable chair has only caused suffering. No more. Jon moves away from the throne and says Dracarys. Drogon spits on the throne with his dragon fire. Jaime runs into the hall with the others. Sam enters the room and tells Jon that the blades are still too hot to touch. Jaime grabs a blade from the glowing throne with his golden hand. Jaime throws her into the snow that falls down from above. Jaime orders the men to somehow get the swords in shape again, and the soldiers do that with their shields or weapons. Jaime recognizes Jon as the leader of all troops and says, we have to fight this time as one army with one leader. Be it Aegon Targaryen or Jon Snow. He is the best leader we can hope for. Everyone recognizes Jon as leader and Jon realizes that he may be the promised prince. His sword flames, Jon holds it up and says, let's kill the Night King and save this damned land. Everyone is shouting. Battle begins around the Red Keep. Several soldiers go to the scorpions at the Red Keep and attach dragon glass to the spears. Yara comes back to the town thanks to Nymeria and his pack of wolves. Yara fights with her men to the scorpions on the city wall, creating a good distraction for Jon and his allies. Together they fight their way free to the White Walkers. Jorah, Jon, Ghost and Jaime fight through the Whites. They are slowly encircled between some buildings. Brian and Tormund fight their way through from behind and kill many Whites, where Jon, Jorah and Jaime were just encircled. Together they free themselves. Brian and Tormund fight in a building and hide briefly there. Arya struggles with Bran on the rooftops to make room for the archers. Nymeria helps Jon with her pack to distract the dead elephants. Davos and Sam convince the surviving citizens in the Red Keep to fight. Sam still remains with a sword at Mizandir and Jon's child. The Night King fights on the ice dragons in the sky against Drogon. Drogon flies lower and the ice dragon tracks him. Night King notes that Jon is not sitting on Drogon and he is fighting on the ground. Jon yells the command to shoot and all scorpions shoot with dragon glass spears on the ice dragon. Some hits him and the ice dragon crashes. He lands in the dragon pit. Drogon lands at Jon's position and he gets on top of him. They fly to the dragon pit. Ghost follows him fast. His allies follow him. Drogon lands in the dragon pit and bites the ice dragon in his head as he lands. Drogon bites deeper and then lets go. He spits fire on the ice dragon. Jon jumps from Drogon and attacks the Night King. The Night King fends off the attack, gets up and fights with Jon as the dragons fight each other. Jon hits several times, but never penetrates deep enough, so the wounds heal with ice too quickly. The Night King grabs Jon's sword and throws Jon off the ice dragon. The Night King jumps from the ice dragon and fights Jon. Drogon spits fire again and moving his wings makes the snow whirl. Jon loses his sword and he dodges. The ice dragon jumps away from Drogon and remains frozen. The Night King stops and Bran appears. Jon asks him, "Why now? Will you tell me something before the end?" Bran says, "You fought well, but your allies will take too long to be here. You've fulfilled your task and all the other enemies are now falling into the trap." Jon says, "Fulfilled? Did you use me to help this monster? Please tell me that you are not you. It must all be a trick of him." Bran says, "He never needed such tricks. Tricks like that made him do what he did." Jon asks, "What do you mean? You know everything about him, don't you? Then tell me what kind of life this man must have led to believe in all this." Jon looks at Bran and the Night King tense. Jon's allies are running to the dragon pit. The Whites and the White Walkers follow them inconspicuously. Bran says, "It was a simple life at first. He was a young lord with a great family. But when he saw something he should not see, bad people tried to kill him for it. Everyone had different motivations for that, as I later learned. The young lord was badly hurt and that led to a war that would annihilate his whole family. His father was beheaded, his mother's throat was cut through, his brothers were shot through the body with arrows. Well, not all died. The survivors only suffered afterwards. They were sold and raped, abducted and hunted, betrayed and killed." Jon looks at Bran in surprise. Bran says, "The young lord lost everything and followed the call of the children of the forest. They gave the Lord a power to destroy the enemies in the north. He became the three-eyed raven. But then he realized that this power should never be stopped, but must be directed against the true threat. Mankind." Jon says angrily, "No." Bran says the Lord recognized the power to travel in time and to walk into other people. He decided and took Azor Ahai's body. Jon says, "Bran, what you're saying, that cannot." Bran says, "The Lord." Jon interrupts him and says, "The life of this Lord. That's your life." Jon looks frozen. Drogon is visibly nervous at the sight of Jon. Jon asks, "Why do you think your life was so cruel? There were also good moments." Bran says, "But unfortunately too much suffering. And I do not want to impose this suffering on anyone. That's why I'm releasing them all." Jon says, "You've seen all the pain in the past. But what about the future? What do you see in my future?" Bran says, "The future is very blurry. But mostly I see the death of Westeros." Jon says, "After all, you do not believe in peace anymore. I even understand that. But I will change that. I will unite this country. I already have that. And if this ends victoriously, there will be peace." Bran says, "You don't understand that. The future of the people is damned. People destroy everything that can become a danger to them. And with me, the White Walkers will not die." Jon asks in surprise, "Why not?" Bran says, "The Night King was not created to expel the first people from Westeros. The Night King was created after the long night." Jon says, No, I thought the Night King was the beginning of everything. Bran says, you don't know much, Aegon. The Night King slowly approaches Jon and grabs his arm. Bran shows him everything in suitable visions. Bran says in the visions, the first humans traveled further north than the children of the forest had ever dared. Then they met the others. The White Walkers. A people living in the land of eternal winter. People saw a threat in them and fought them. The White Walkers resisted in the long night and made sure that the war didn't take place in their country. In winter they were at an advantage. Even their magic withstood. The dead could fight for the White Walkers. But when winter ended, this Azor Ahai could end the war. They built the wall to have an insurmountable border between both sides. The children of the forest told Azor Ahai about the power of the White Walkers and promised to create a weapon for him. A weapon with which you can stop the White Walkers. There should be peace for that. Azor Ahai volunteered and even got tied up. But when they pressed the dagger of the peace agreement into his chest, he suffered. I will free him from it. Actually, I have already. Jon breaks free, so ends the vision, falls aside and is so closer to his sword. Jon looks at the Night King. He looks bleak, gets up slowly and asks Bran, look into my future. See if I can bring peace. You know me. Bran looks at him and says, yes, but that does not change the nature of men. Even if you can do it. The next king will fight wars again and everything starts again. Aegon, I understand you. You don't want to accept your end, but you don't have to be scared. Your suffering will be over soon. Jon asks Bran, this tree on the God's Eye, what should that be? Why did you lure us into this trap? Bran says, the weirwood tree was the source of magic for the Night King. The Night King dies with the dead of this tree. This will take months, until the magic is finally gone. With this I wanted to ensure that this weapon will be destroyed with the end of Westeros. So no one will ever meet a White Walker again and the rest of humanity will be safe. Their wars will continue, but the past has shown that the people of Essos will now live more peacefully now that slavery is about to end. Jon sees his sword and Drogon. He hears his calling men in the distance. Then Jon says, then please promise me one. If you win now, you can kill me. Not the Night King. Not your other self. You. Bran says, that makes no difference, Aegon. But since you gave people hope, I fulfill that wish. I'll travel back in time and redeem you. Jon says firmly, then do it, Bran. Become the Night King and kill me here. Bran says, as you wish. Bran disappears. Bran stands on a meadow on a weirwood tree, around him are stones in a formation. Bran sees Azor Ahai getting the dragon glass dagger hit in the chest by the children of the forest. Bran's eyes turn white. The eyes of Azor Ahai seem to freeze and turn blue. Jon looks around carefully in the dragon pit and then sees the Night King. The Night King moves again, goes to Jon, takes his ice sword tighter and starts to strike his sword. Drogon roars and Jon dodges the attack. He takes his sword off the ground and averts the attack. The Night King attacks again. After a short fight, Ghost jumps into the fight and helps Jon to retreat. Drogon defends himself against the ice dragon. The Night King kills Ghost. Jon yells about it. Jon's allies come and defend him. Jaime, Arya, Edmure, Jorah, and Bran attack the Night King with their Valyrian swords from the Iron Throne, but after a fight with them, the Night King dodges every attack of them and counters them. Jon sees the Night King hurt Arya. Jon intervenes and saves her life. Jon loses his sword again. The ice dragon steps behind the Night King, and by doing so his attackers retreat a bit. The Night King raises his hands. All corpses on the battlefields are rising. The bodies of Circe, the Mountain, the Hound, and Tyrians also rise. Even the war elephants outside the city. They all run into town for the dragon pit. The Night King gets on the ice dragon and flies to the sky. Jon tells his allies that the Night King can see the future and therefore believes he has won in a few months. Jon says that's the reason why he will lose his power in that time. Bran says, so we could just hide. Jon says, yeah, Illyria Sand's tactic might work. Hide from the enemy and kill him step by step. Arya asks Jon, why do you suddenly want to flee? You just wanted to destroy him and you were close. What happened? Jon looks depressed and says now I know why he does that. Who he was. I do not know if I can do it. Arya says you don't know. Whoever this man was, he wants to kill your child. It is not even a day old. He has no right to. No right to all of that. Jon looks at her in surprise. Arya gives Jon the dagger of Valyrian steel. She says, the next time you lose your sword, take the dagger and bring it to an end. Jon takes the dagger and says, all right. We finish it here and now. Jon yells at his ally, I'm going to destroy the enemy now. You just have to hold the dragon pit. All enemy troops are on their way for us. Don't fight for me. Fight for you and the lives of your children. Jon picks up his sword, it in flames. He gets on Drogon and they rise up. Jon sees the army of the dead surrounding the dragon pit and slowly enters it. A final battle begins in Dragon Pit. Edmure Tully dies in this battle. Brian and Tormund fight their way through the building, but they have to retreat in that building. Brian gets desperate, but Tormund manages to give her courage again. Drogon follows the ice dragon. They fight in the sky. Jon briefly gets in contact within the fight and roars, you want to redeem us with the death. You don't know what's coming after death. I know. Nothing comes after death. Neither suffering nor joy. There is no peace waiting. Only darkness. The fight continues and Jon manages to knock the Night King's ice sword off of him. Jon hits his burning sword into the throat of the ice dragon, knocking off his icy skin. Jon keeps beating. The Night King stops Jon, but Drogon gives him the rest and bites his head off. Drogon cannot get away from the ice dragon and everyone crashes. Jon is still fighting with the Night King while falling. Jon hits his sword into the belly of the Night King and rams the Valyrian dagger into his chest. The bright blue in the eyes of the Night King goes out. Drogon makes a crash landing before the Red Keep. Jon rolls on the ground. The Night King has fallen a little further. Jon gets up and sees the Night King rising slowly. His ice splinters and the Night King collapses slowly. The Night King walks slowly to Jon. Jon looks around for a weapon, but finds none. The Night King grabs the dagger from his chest. The Night King sees Jon into his eyes. Then he drops the dagger out of his chest and breaks completely. The Battle of the Dragon Pit ends when the White Walkers and the Whites break to the ground and die. Everyone is cheering because the war is finally over. Jon picks up the dagger, sees the heap of ice from the Night King and says, "Thank you." Tormund and Brian are in their building full of body parts. They rejoice, and as Tormund offers himself, Brian says fuck it. They go to a room where there are no corpses and do it wildly with each other. Jon's allies arrive at the Red Keep. First they see Drogon and then Jon. They stop at Jon and see the pile of ice. Sam comes out of the Red Keep and sees Jon. He thanks everyone and asks how it should continue now. Westeros no longer has a queen. Jaime says he cannot imagine any other king except Aegon Targaryen. Most agree with him. Jon refuses, but Davos says, "You are the most successful king I have ever seen. And after all, you're the man who deserves it the most." Jon says, "I don't deserve anything. I only used my life to do what I swore once. Being the shield of the people." Sam says, "And that's exactly what you can do from here. Rule the kingdoms and keep the peace." Jon looks at everyone and realizes that they seem to agree. Jon looks determined and says, "No. I will not be king. I have the name and the blood. That's the only reason I can become king. And if my son someday replaces me and does everything differently, I'll become king if the people accept me." Bran comes in and says, "And who's to become your successor when you die?" Jon says, "That's what the people decide. Everyone should get a chance to come to power. So we did it at the Night's Watch. That's how I became Lord Commander." Yara agrees and says, "We do it the same way on the Iron Islands." Jaime and Sam accept it. Jon says, "First, I'll tell you something. The Night King was not anyone. It was a man who saw Westeros and found only war and suffering there. This man would never have turned that magic against us if we had not waged wars. It was our fault and that of our ancestors. That was the price of suffering that the lords exposed to the people. Help me to keep the peace. No more pain or wars. No more." People cheer Jon and shout, "Long may he reign! Long may he reign!" Jon is celebrated, but from his perspective he sees the ruined city. Jon says, "There's no time to celebrate now. Now is the time to mourn our dead and help the country out of this mess." The soldiers cheer him. Drogon roars. Jon goes to Daenerys' corpse and mourns. Then he gets his soldiers in to take Daenerys' body. Missandei holds Jon's child and looks at Jon worried. Jon sees Missandei and walks out of the hall. Bran and Podrick help in the city to find food supplies. Bran sees Brian and Tormund coming out of a building together. Jaime enters the room from the small council. Jon, Sam, Davos, Illyria, Yara, the new commander, Arya and Jorah are in the room. Jaime asks Jon what is so important that it has to be discussed in secret. "I thought you wanted to end these things. Let the people decide." Jon says the people should not know anything from this. Otherwise, chaos may arise again. Illyria says, "Definitely, would you let us know what you want, King Aegon?" Jon says, "What I'm going to tell you now will not be easy. The war may not be over yet." Jaime says, "The Night King is dead, the White Walkers are destroyed. We saw it." Jon says, "I had contact with the Night King and he told me a lot. He told me about the Long Night. He told me that the Night King was intended as a weapon against the first White Walkers after the Long Night. The Night King, however, had found a way to direct this weapon against humans. He had the opinion that a renewed war with the true White Walkers would be inevitable and that we would lose." Jaime is shocked and says, "The true White Walkers? But the wall? He would never get Trophet without the dragon." Jon says, "Exactly. The wall must be rebuilt. But for safety I will do something else. I will try to get in contact and try to negotiate peace." Night, in front of the Red Keep is a big pile of wood. Jon puts Daenerys' body on it. Jon goes to Drogon in front of the Red Keep. He says goodbye to Daenerys. Jon says, I'm going to travel behind the wall with Drogon one last time. I don't know when or if I will ever return. But I promise you that when I return, everyone will be safe. Until then, I ask you to talk to each other. Forge no plans or plots. Help each other. Meet regularly in the capital and start to negotiate, but please don't force the people to another war. Don't let our sacrifices be in vain. People accept it. But Arya looks down. Then Jon says Dracarys and Drogon spits his fire on Daenerys' corpse. The pile of wood burns with her. Everyone is silent and Jon stares into the fire. Jon packs his bag for his trip. Arya visits Jon before leaving and says, now I'm going to be the new Lady of Winterfell, right? Jon says, I'm sorry. If I could. Arya interrupts Jon and says it's fine. In this peaceful world you create, some dreams can't be fulfilled. Jon says, Arya, Arya says, no, I want it that way. My sister taught me a lot. I can handle it. Both smile and say goodbye. Jon says goodbye to Sam and asks him to take care of his son. Even though Sam has a lot to do as the new Lord of the Reach. Both are smiling. Sam says to Jon, I think I'll write a book about you. Something poetic in which you are the hero. Jon says a song. Sam says a song of ice maybe. Your name was snow and your enemy was of ice. Could be poetic. Sam smiles. Jon says I was not the hero. Daenerys was the hero. She had the will to achieve everything. She was the mother of dragons. Sam says, what about a song of ice? And Jon interrupts him and says, I hope I can read it soon. But please tell the truth. Sam agrees with Jon. Jon says, if you really want to write about me, you should know one thing. Surely you still know about Bran's powers, right? Sam says yes, he told me he is the three-eyed raven and could see everything. Jon says he saw everything. All wars and the suffering of the people. He could take over the people himself in the past. At least that's what he told me. Sam asks, when did he tell you that? Jon says a few days ago at the Dragon Pit. Sam is surprised and says, do you think Bran himself controlled the body of the Night King? So you could kill him just because of that? Because Bran helped you. Jon says, that would be the more poetic story, right? Jon smiles, then looks down and says, no. Bran has controlled the Night King from the first day and brought this mess over us. Sam is shocked. Jon says, please write that too. The whole truth. But first you should finish your Maester training. Jon smiles at Sam and walks to the door. Sam sees him walking out to Drogon. Davos wishes Jon good luck. Jon gets on Drogon and both fly north. Jorah is at the harbor of King's Landing and says goodbye to Missandei. Jorah says I'm going to the only place I've ever felt comfortable. I travel back to the Dragon Bay and help Daario to bring peace. That's what our Khaleesi would have wanted. Jorah wants to go on the boat when he sees Drogon fly over him. Sam sees Jon flying into the distance. In Winterfell, Bran sits frozen on the weirwood tree. Drogon lands there and Jon hits Bran with the Valyrian dagger. Jon says goodbye to Bran and returns to Drogon. Jon flies with Drogon over the wall into the blizzard. The blizzard slowly covers the picture and everything stops. A male voice asks and then Sam answers. Then he disappeared. King Jon traveled behind the wall, but never came back. The freezed snowstorm becomes a picture. An image in a book. A hand closes the book. The man gets up from the table and says, as I always tell you. He has failed everyone. Just leave everything behind and fly far away with his dragon glass. Maybe he can't do any more. Sam is old and says, and why should he do that? He could have been king. The young man says, everyone always tells me what he had and how great he was. The most honorable man who ever lived. I also heard that he was a man of the Night's Watch. He should have spent his life there. He probably was not that great. Sam says many young people say something like that. But he gave each one of you a chance to do better. Even you, Eddard. The young man says, my father could have been king. He could have seen me growing up. Sam says, I learned one thing about Jon. He always comes back. Eddard looks away, disinterested. Then the city bells ring. Eddard says, he certainly isn't. Sam says, the small council comes together. I have to get prepared. Eddard says, for decades we have no real leader. My father will not return. It's time to choose a new king, and you know better than anyone else that I'm ready. Sam smiles at him and says, maybe we'll see soon. A brown-haired man enters the room and says, did you teach the prince enough now, father? Sam says, if Eddard wants to, he can go anytime, my son. Eddard looks at Sam's son and says, let's go, Sam. They both leave the room. Jaime arrives in King's Landing with a few men. Bran welcomes him. Jaime says, are you sure your wife will approve that? Bran says, we're old, she's old. And soon our children will have the power in Dorne. What should happen when we talk? Illyria Sand arrives with her new daughter and asks Bran, when will you finally realize that these Lannisters cannot to be trusted? Bran takes a step back from Jaime and says, I'm sorry, old friend. Arya arrives at the Red Keep with adult Lyanna Mormont and her husband and sees the widow of Edmure Tully and his adult son. The son greets Arya. The widow wants to prevent this, however, angrily. She says to Arya, I'll never forget what you did to my family. I know what it means when a girl tells you that winter has come for House Free. Arya turns away. Robin Arryn sees Arya, but he walks away from her angrily. Brienne and her red-haired daughter welcome Arya. Arya calls the girl Sansa and says, I think it's nice that you've been named after my sister. I hope you don't die as early as she does. Sansa looks intimidated. Brienne says, don't worry Sansa, Arya Stark has a special sense of humor, doesn't she? Arya smiles and agrees. Arya asks, where is your father? Brienne replies for Sansa and says, Tormund did not come along. He says these meetings are not for him. The older Podrick arrives and greets the three. Sam also arrives and greets Arya. Sam then asks her, still having trouble with Robin? Arya says, he had a bad education. Now he wants a bad alliance. At least that would be one for me. Sam says they run out of supplies and we don't know when winter ends. Arya says, then he should have been more carefully with the supplies of his people. My people went hungry to survive while he was celebrating. He reminds me of Joffrey. Sam says, don't tell him like you're telling me. Arya says, of course not, Maester Samwell. Yara arrives by ship at the landing stage of King's Landing's harbour. She meets Jorah and asks him why he has travelled the long way from Essos ago. Jorah answers there could be a problem. I should inform you personally. Together they go to the city. Sam opens the small council in a room at the Red Keep and lets talk Jorah. Jorah says, I know many here have their differences due to the acts of the time of the Iron Throne. But maybe we'll have to devote ourselves to another threat soon. The Iron Bank has been demanding debt to Cersei's payment to the Golden Company for decades. They have an army again and could come to Westeros. The Dragon Bay would be ready to help you. No consideration. We just want to secure peace as our queen would have done it once. Jaime thanks Jorah for the message and is about to say something when another city bell rings. Everyone except Jorah is shocked. Jorah asks in surprise, "What does the sounding of this bell mean?" Sam says Jon is back. King Jon is back. Eddard is still surprised. Drogon, now much taller, lands in front of the Red Keep. Jon is old and already has some grey hair. Everyone is amazed at his appearance. Eddard comes out fast and sees Jon descend from Drogon. He is overwhelmed and intimidated. Sam greets Jon and asks him if he needs anything. Jon apparently ignores him and just walks past Sam. Sam follows him and walks beside Jon. Sam says, "I cannot imagine what you must have experienced up there. It's good that you're back. The situation is difficult. It might be best if you became king again." Jon looks at him and hugs him. Sam evaluates that as a yes and lets everyone gather for Jon in the throne room. Arya sees the new stone throne. Jon enters the room seemingly emotionless. Arya greets Jon and they hug. Jon looks over Arya and looks into the next fire he sees. Jon gives his son Eddard a hand and looks at him briefly, then he looks back into the fire. Sam notices this and looks worried. Jon goes to the throne. Eddard asks Sam what he has there. Sam says, "This is the book for your father. I wrote it for him." The book name is A Song of Ice and Fire. Jon always watches into a fire as he walks to the throne. Jon takes his seat on the throne and Lyanna Mormont says, "Long may he reign." Jon watches into the flame all the time. Sam sees that and looks worried, then scared. The people say together, "Long may he reign." The last picture is Jon as he sits on the throne and stares emotionless into the fire. The end. It's okay to cry.